So my name is Bill Tibbetts. I am with Crossroads Urban Center, and we have sent every candidate for office in Salt Lake City this year a set of 5 questions about housing and homelessness. Today we're talking with Mayor Erin Mendenhall, who's running for re-election, about those questions. And so thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Our first question that we sent everybody is about housing for people who have been homeless for at least 12 months or 4 times in the last 3 years with a disabling condition. And so the question is, do you support the production of sufficient permanent supportive housing to meet the needs of people with physical and mental disabilities in Salt Lake City?
100%, wholeheartedly. It's not only the most basic human need next to sleep and food and water, but it is also their absolute right. And you mentioned folks with disabilities who, through the ADA, are legally entitled in this country to that kind of assistance that is insufficient in the state of Utah right now. And you see this kind of support from my administration. It goes back though before when I was on the city council, and I came in 2014 as a new council person, and I remember pretty soon after that I got a meeting request from some folks at Crossroads Urban Center, yourself included, 10 years ago now almost, and you sat me down and told me how desperate the situation is and how much worse it was about to become given the growth that was in our pipeline. You told me the concepts that you all had from a policy or investment standpoint and what hadn't been done along the decades. So I just want to thank you for setting my course as a policymaker and then as mayor from the beginning to focus on this issue. And you see it with our investments in over $55 million in the last 3.5 years in affordable housing unit creation, which is up 413%. If you look back over the last 15 or 20 years in Salt Lake City's history, there's a bumpy but pretty flat line of affordable housing investment that just skyrockets beginning with my administration. So we've seen 4,000 affordable units created. We've had over 300, right now we have about 220 permanent supportive housing units that's been created during that time, with another 500 in the pipeline right now, permanent supportive housing. And it is, it's exciting that we're finally making such big strides, but we have a long ways to go for what is truly a statewide issue. And we cannot do it alone. And I would say to the support that's needed, that's the biggest shift that I've seen in the last 3 years, is that the city is no longer standing alone, and we see the state stepping in with $105 million between the last 2 legislative sessions for deeply affordable housing. And when you couple that with the county's investments and our $55 million, plus the $30 million our city council just approved that we've yet to put into the pipeline, we're finally turning the corner.
Okay. Our second question we sent all the candidates is about housing for families that are headed by parents with disabling conditions who've been in the shelter for 12 months or more. There are families that have been at the homeless shelter right now for 2 years, and that is part of why we've had not enough beds for a few months last year. So would you commit to actively support efforts to build 200 units of child-centered supportive housing in Salt Lake County during the next 5 years to fully meet the current need?
Yes. And we broke ground on the Spark project on North Temple, which was city redevelopment agency owned land across the street from Rocky Mountain Power, where we've partnered with Brinshore Development. There's going to be 200 units there. 100 of the 200 are affordable, and they are up to 4 bedrooms. There's going to be a 5,000 square foot daycare facility in the building and a playground center for the kids within the courtyard of the building. And to see more of that, we've prioritized with all this money that we're putting out into the private market to make affordability happen. We're prioritizing, meaning they're more likely to get a loan from us and they're more likely to get a better interest rate if it's family-sized housing. Because we're seeing so many micro units and one bedrooms cranking out, we want to see more family-sized units happening. So absolutely yes, and we're excited to see those family-sized ones. Spark's one example, and there are others.
Okay, the third question we sent all the candidates is about assistance for people whose homes are destroyed by development. Do you support the creation of tenant relocation assistance program in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, and we just put the first $250,000 into the very first tenant relocation assistance and a center where tenants can come to at the city to receive some direction and funding and possibly relocation, both financial assistance and location finding. The city council just approved this, and it's one component of our Thriving in Place plan. When I started this job as mayor back in January of 2020, March came along, a pandemic launched, municipalities, companies across the country ratcheted down on budgets. One of the few things we didn't pull back on as we brought the city council a budget amid the beginning of the pandemic was this anti-gentrification, really a mitigation plan, which we've come to call Thriving in Place, which recognizes that this is an amazing place to live. A lot of people are moving here, and that the market forces, which are particularly controlled by our state legislature when we can't do rent control, we can't really do inclusionary zoning, etc. We want the people who built these communities to stay here in these communities. And so we are developing a community benefit policy as a component of Thriving in Place. There's 22 different actions in Thriving in Place plan, and making sure that if housing is going to be destroyed because of new development, that there's a policy in place so that it is either replaced at the same earning and income level, and that we can connect the residents who are displaced to the new unit when it's available, or that new units are funded because of the destruction of that. So absolutely, we're inventing new ways. Check out the Thriving in Place plan, but our families and people who are displaced because of the development happening here are about to get new assistance from the city. You've been doing that kind of help and assistance a long time here at Crossroads, but we're trying to complement that work and add some new tools as well.
Okay, you basically answered my fourth question. Do you
Sorry.
support the creation of a community benefit policy to prevent the loss of existing affordable units?
Yeah. And it's actually, even though the council is still deliberate, or they're considering and looking at the Thriving in Place policy, it's not fully passed just yet. They've already given us a thumbs up on some of the components of it, and we're bringing our community and neighborhoods team in meeting with developers who are coming in and wanting to do projects, are putting the community benefit policy on the table and saying to the development community, look, this is in the pipeline. If you want to be a good player with the city and with the community you're coming into, do this, bring this. And we're actually seeing developers pick it up. I think you're going to see some projects that incorporate it even before it may be fully passed.
Okay. Do you support efforts to increase funding to address homelessness and housing instability?
With all of my heart, yes. And with our dramatic increase in affordable housing investment and unit creation, with our investments in helping people where they're at on the street by creating the community commitment program where we go out to encampments, we go out and engage people where they're at, the rapid intervention team that comes in sooner to an encampment as it's established to try to connect with services, make sure that the spaces are clean both for the people on the streets and who are experiencing homelessness, those who are using the spaces as the public. We're always learning. We're always listening to the community, adapting Some things we try, they don't work the way we want them to. We learn from that, we move on to the next great idea. And we can't do it alone. I mentioned that at the beginning, that's the biggest shift I've seen, is that the city is no longer alone, either in acknowledging, for example, that we need a new shelter, which you can go back and see me being the only one in 2020 and 21 saying, we need another homeless shelter when we opened the Sugar House temporary winter shelter, and then went on to open the airport in with service providers for winter, and then Ramada in. Now the state's saying it, and they've put $1 million on the table for the state to pilot outdoor resource center or a sanctioned camp. The state is at the table doing this now with us. And it's appropriate because every community in this entire state has residents who lose their housing. And most communities in this state do not have services that are necessary for people in those circumstances. And they haven't invested in deeply affordable and permanent supportive housing. So I've had mayors and council people over my 10 years in City Hall who look me in the eye and tell me if we see someone experiencing homelessness in our city, we put them in the back of the cop car and drop them off in Salt Lake. I think they mean it compassionately because they don't know what else to do. But those are policy decisions that those cities have made over the decades that leave them with nothing else to do. And it's time, and it's finally beginning to happen, that the state takes a leadership role to make sure that Ogden, Salt Lake City, and St. George aren't the epicenters for what is a statewide need.
Okay, you've answered all the questions we sent you. How can people learn more about your campaign?
ErinMendenhall.com. You can read up on our policy issues and what's happened in the city in the last 3.5 years. It's been a phenomenal 3.5 years, probably a term unlike any other in the city. And I'm really proud of this community and the tenacity to not go backwards in every way, that we are coming through pandemic and earthquakes and a lot of civil unrest and a reckoning with history and the current situation of racism and disproportionate access to needs, human needs. We are moving forward in a strong way as a community. So ErinMendenhall.com, check out the details, but check out Thriving in Place, and I believe it's thrivingin.placeslc.com, where you can see the plan that includes a lot of the things we've talked about today for stabilizing our communities and keeping our people intact.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you for teaching me. Thanks for having me here today.